Okay, let's start with a Excel review problem. The topic that we're worried about here, or considering, is Excel indexing. Okay, so in the problem statement, you're starting with cell E7, so right here, and you have a formula in that particular cell, and this is the formula. So notice it's got a combination of absolute addressing and relative addressing. Okay, so here's what we mean by that. Okay, let's consider each of these 4 yellow cells, and remember what we're going to do is we're going to copy from this cell and we're going to paste that formula into cells 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so when you paste it, some of the columns get incremented and some of the rows get incremented depending on whether there's a dollar sign or not. Okay, so let's just take a look at this on a case-by-case basis for each of the 4 yellow cells. Okay, so I've made a table here in advance to help us think of this. Okay, and so I've labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. This labeling corresponds to the cell numbers, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so from there we can look at the column offset for each of the cells. Okay, so we're starting with this point, the column offset. Well, this is in the same column, so there's 0 offset. Okay, so going to the next cell, cell number 2, you start in column E and you pasted the formula into F. Okay, that's a column offset of 1. Okay, the next one, you start at E7 and then you go down 1 column, down 1 row and over 2 columns. Okay, and so that takes care of 3. And for 4, the column offset is 1, 2, 3. All right, so hopefully you understand the column offsets. That's a pretty simple concept. Let's go now to the rows. Okay, so relative to the starting cell, this is 1, 2 rows down. Okay, so cell number 1, labeled number 1, has a row offset of 2. Okay, cell number 2, I think you can tell, has a row offset of 1, 2, 3. Okay, and cell number 3 has a row offset of 1. Okay, you just go down by 1 relative to the starting cell. And the last one, row 4, you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so the row offset is 5 on that one. Okay, so these things become important because, let me put the numbers back. Based on the column and row offsets, you can tell what happens to each of the arguments of the summation formula. So you notice here what I did was I copied the arguments from here. Those are literally the arguments from the sum formula. Okay, so what to do next? All right, let's figure out what happens to the columns for this particular entry, $A1. Because the dollar sign is there, the column index is not going to be incremented. So I can just copy that straight down. And I know that's going to be the first argument of the pasted sums. Okay, but then I look here, that's a 1, it doesn't have a dollar. So 1 is my starting point, and on the rows I have an offset of 2. So this number is going to be 1 plus 2, which is 3. Then we have 1 plus 3, which is 4, 1 plus 1, which is 2, and 1 plus 5, which is 6. Okay, so that takes care of the $A1 argument when I paste it into those 4 cells. Let's look at the next column. Okay, so the next column, there's not a dollar sign in front of the C, so the column index is going to get incremented. Okay, so in the first case, there's an increment of 0. Remember, we're looking at column offsets now. There's an increment of 0, so we just keep the C. The next one, we have an increment of 1. So C plus 1 letter is D. And then the next entry, C plus 2 letters, is E. And the next entry, C plus 3 letters, is F. Okay? Now the dollar sign tells you that you don't increment the row. You just copy that straight down. All right, so that's what goes there. I'll let you work on the rest of this. Here's the answers. I think you get the idea. You can check your work. But here's what I have. The last column is particularly easy because nothing gets incremented, so I just literally copy down $A, $3. Oops. Okay, so I can use this information to answer the question. The formula that shows up in cell 1 is you start with the original sum, and instead of the arguments being A1, C$4, D$2, $A, $3, what you get is you just read these off. Okay, $A3, C$4, D$2, and $A, $3. Okay, and by the way, you can find the answer to that sum because it just, like in the first one, it adds up the entries in these particular cell and column and row designations. Okay, so I think you understand that part pretty well. But this is how you get the formula. Okay, I'll do one more. The formula for the second would be $A4, D$4, E$2, and $A, $3. Okay, so you continue on and you can figure out the formulas for each of the cells. Okay, so that answers part A. And part A, we're done now. Let's move to part B. Okay, the reason I threw in part B is because in the first problem, let me clear that. In the first problem, I separated all the arguments with commas. And so that just means add up those individual cells. There's also a colon operation that you can use in Excel. I think that's the one we use the most often. Okay, so if I put in this formula into any given cell, what would the answer be? Well, here's what you do. You look at the starting point A2. So I go column A, row 2, and I know I start with this cell. Okay, then I find C4. Okay, so column C, row 4, it's going to be here. All right, so when I use this colon operator, what I do is I read everything down and across between A2 and C4. So since this is a sum operation, I would add up those numbers, and I think if I did it right, these add up to 16.